Cryonics. You hear that word and you probably think of science fiction, right? You know, suspended animation, cheating death, waking up in some crazy distant future. But what if I told you it's a real, messy, and scientifically fascinating gamble that hundreds of people are taking right now all over the world? Okay, picture this. It's 2021. Russian police pull over two huge trucks, and there's smoke just billowing out of them. But it's not a fire, it's liquid nitrogen. And inside, the cryopreserved bodies of people who paid a fortune to be brought back to life one day. Yeah, a nasty dispute between the company's founders literally spilled out onto the highway, dragging the sci-fi dream into a super chaotic real-world mess. And that whole scene is a world away from what we see in the movies, isn't it? We get these sleek, sterile pods where the hero wakes up centuries later to travel the stars, or, survive the apocalypse. It's clean, it's cool, and it looks like it works perfectly every time. Well, this massive gap between the dream and the reality, that's exactly what we're going to dig into. To really get our heads around cryonics, first we have to understand a fundamental, and I mean fatal, flaw. Here's the thing. You can't just freeze a person and expect them to be okay. It's the same reason a strawberry you pull out of the freezer turns to absolute mush when you thaw it. The act of freezing itself is just incredibly destructive to living things. When you get down to the cellular level, there are two big killers. First, as water freezes, it forms these sharp, jagged ice crystals. They're like microscopic daggers that literally shred and puncture your cell membranes, tearing your tissues apart. And second, as that pure water turns to ice, the liquid that's left behind becomes this super concentrated salt solution. This salty brine then sucks all the water out of the surrounding cells, making them collapse. For the brain, where every cell is irreplaceable, this is absolutely catastrophic. So if just freezing a body causes this much damage, does that mean the whole idea of coming back to life is scientifically impossible? I mean, is cryonics just a fantasy from the get-go? Well, not exactly. Modern cryonics has this really clever workaround called vitrification. You could call it the glass solution. And the whole point isn't to freeze at all, but to turn it into a glass-like solid so those destructive ice crystals never even get a chance to form. So what is vitrification? Basically, it's a process where you cool a liquid so fast that it solidifies into what's called an amorphous state. Think about the difference between a perfectly ordered, structured ice crystal and the totally chaotic, jumbled up atoms in a pane of glass. Vitrification creates that glassy solid, and the key thing here is it preserves the original structure of the cells. The whole process is this delicate three-step dance. First, the body's blood and water get replaced with these things called cryoprotectants. Think of them as a medical-grade antifreeze. Second, the body is cooled down, and I mean extremely rapidly, so fast that ice crystals just don't have time to form. The result? The tissues solidify into a stable, glass-like state, locking everything perfectly in place. Okay, so how do we get from this wild sci-fi idea to something that's actually used in modern medicine? Well, while bringing a whole person back is still way off in the future, the core technology of cryopreservation is actually being used successfully every single day. 1.5 million. That's roughly how many human embryos are cryopreserved right now in the United States for IVF. And this isn't a theory. We have been successfully vitrifying, thawing, and bringing human embryos to term for decades. In fact, the very first baby from frozen sperm was born way back in 1953. And the potential here is just massive. Every year in the US alone, about 12,000 perfectly good donor organs are just thrown away. Why? Because they can't be preserved long enough to find a matching recipient. If we could perfect organ vitrification, we could create organ banks, basically eliminating wait times and saving thousands of lives. And researchers are making progress. They've already successfully vitrified and transplanted rabbit kidneys. It's proof the concept works. But you know what's truly amazing? Humans didn't even invent this concept. Nature beat us to it by a long shot, and it's given us this incredible proof of concept that surviving a deep freeze is actually possible. Just listen to these masters of cryosurvival. the American wood frog, up to 70% of the water in its body can turn into solid ice. It has no heartbeat, no breathing, no brain activity for months on end. And then, in the spring, it just thaws out and hops away. The woolly bear caterpillar spends most of its life as a literal frozen block. How do they do it? They've evolved their own natural antifreeze, stuff like glucose, to protect their cells. And get this, scientists revived a tiny roundworm that had been frozen in the Siberian permafrost for 46,000 years. It just woke up and started reproducing. This is huge because it proves that biological structures and life itself can stay viable after being frozen for an unbelievable amount of time. So the science seems plausible, right? But that brings us to the biggest challenge of all for human cryonics, what I'm calling the 1,000-year gamble. Because the greatest risks here might not be scientific at all, they're human. We're talking about money, mistakes, and just the sheer difficulty of keeping a project like this running for centuries. I mean, the early days of cryonics were, well, they were a complete disaster. You can't make this up. There's this story from the 70s where the head of one facility, who was a TV repairman by trade, went on vacation. He left a non-literate assistant in charge. The system failed, 9 bodies thawed out, and just decomposed. The practices were just horrifyingly amateur. To make repairs or just to cram more patients into these homemade capsules, bodies were frequently pulled out, partially thawed, and then cooled down again, causing just immense damage every single time. And then there's this awful tragic case. When a capsule that was holding a young boy was opened up for an inspection, they found that thermal stress had caused the body to physically crack. It's just a grim reminder of how fragile this whole thing is over the long term. So here's the crucial bottom line point. With only one symbolic exception, every single person who was cryopreserved before 1974 has since been lost. Their capsules failed, their funding completely ran out, or their families just gave up and had them buried. The entire first generation is gone. All right, let's tackle a few common questions I bet you're thinking. First, does memory even survive? Well, experiments with trained roundworms actually show that learned behaviors are retained after they're vitrified and revived. Why are patients stored upside down? That's a simple fail-safe. If the liquid nitrogen ever boils off the head, and more importantly, the brain stays frozen the longest. Can you just preserve the brain? Yep, it's a cheaper option called neuropreservation. Is it legal? Totally, but only after you've been declared legally dead, which kicks off a frantic race against decay. And finally, what are the odds? Even the biggest fans admit it's a long shot, but they frame it as a tiny chance versus the 0% chance you get with burial. And that really gets to the heart of the matter. The biggest question here isn't whether the science can work one day. It's whether the human organization you paid tens of thousands of dollars will even exist in 100, 500, or 1,000 years to see it through. Can any company really last that long? Which leads to the final and maybe the most personal question of all. Let's just say it all works. Against all odds, you are successfully revived centuries from now. Everyone you've ever known is long gone. The world is completely alien. You are utterly, totally alone. Was the gamble worth it? Cryonics is really just one piece of this fascinating puzzle of extending human life. If you want to explore more about the science of longevity and anti-aging, make sure you subscribe to the channel. And just a quick note, this is all for informational purposes. The cryonics industry involves some really significant financial and logistical risks, and this is not any form of medical or financial advice.